Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. Alright, I'm here with a little horror novella roundup for the week. These are some things that I read on my vacation last week. Things that were good enough to talk about and to suggest. So, first up is The House on Abigail Lane, and that is written by Kealan Patrick Burke. The easy one-sentence review of this novella is a shorter, non-experimental House of Leaves. My wife and I, we recently watched Poltergeist 1 and 2, and this is a perfect book to read along with those two movies. It is a wonderful little haunted house novella, and it's written in an interesting style. And it has Burke's kind of his trademark use of haunting imagery. Burke's really good at writing things that are creepingly unsettling. Things that bubble up very slowly. And while you're reading them, they don't really creep you out. But after you're done with the book, a lot of his imagery and a lot of his words and the things that he creates stay with you for quite a long time. At least they do with me. So The House on Abigail Lane is written in an essay form, and it's written by an unnamed essay writer, who is writing all about the history of this house, this haunted house on Abigail Lane. The unnamed writer is presenting the facts that have been investigated and is citing from both fictional and non-fictional sources. And what I mean, there are things that the writer cites that are from our world, the real world, and made up sources that exist only in this book. So the essay traces the history of the house on Abigail Lane from the 1950s all the way through to today, when the house starts to enjoy a kind of viral popularity on sites like Reddit and YouTube. And throughout the house's history, certain people who enter it, they seem to vanish. Some get teleported to another world in which there is this entity known only as the Sunflower God, a world in which people have no faces except for mouths, and a world that may be in some way connected to the dreams of a writer that we learn about towards the end of the book. So I've been a fan of Burke's for quite a long time, since like the early 2000s, I believe, when I first read the 121 to Pennsylvania and Others, a short story collection, and an early novella that he wrote called Turtle Boy. And Burke has a really unique voice. I think he writes with a great deal of clarity, and he utilizes deceptively simple prose. And like I said before, his stories linger in my mind far after I'm done reading them. I just recently looked at, still have my receipt from when I purchased 121 to Pennsylvania and Others, and I bought that in 2008, and there are still things that I remember about it today, 12 years later, and that's going to be the case for this as well. The House on Abigail Lane comes highly recommended. I'm going to read just a little bit so you can get just a sense of his prose. And this is when he's writing a little more like horror style. So this portion here is we are reading a snippet of an essay within the book written by a character named Doug Lowell. And so this is his account of something that happened to him on the night of May 1st, 1983. Not even 4 months after he was a character who moved into the house on Abigail Lane. And this is an excerpt from one of the 4 essays he wrote for Marita Hopkins and Karun Venkatesh, Nonfiction Study of Combat Shock. He was a Vietnam vet, if I remember correctly. And so here's one of his accounts of something that happened to him. I reached the top of the stairs and braced myself in the dark for whatever might be waiting down there with a gun or a knife. I slowed my breathing, demanded my pulse slow too before my heart exploded. I hurried downstairs into the living room, and the living room was gone. Immediately I smelled chlorine, that strong summertime pool smell when they put too much of it in the water and it burns the hell out of your eyes. And that pool was in my living room, or rather, where the living room used to be. Now I found myself outside in a day-lit courtyard, the glare of the sun being slapped to pieces by the waves as children laughed and splashed and hollered at the parents, those patiently smiling bronze-bodied adults lounging in chairs on both sides of the pool. None of them had faces, only thin-lipped mouths, and their hair, all that same light pink color, moved sinuously as if underwater. The dappled light from the pool animated their faces in place of expressions. It felt entirely reasonable to scream when I looked up and away from these impossible monsters and saw misshapen black birds with half a dozen silver dollars for eyes. Their beaks were like bruised human hands snapping from the air, insects the size of my fist. I stepped away, my body tensing to run, and collided with a child who cursed at me in a language I don't know, and then giggled. I did not look at him, couldn't. Had I seen his face, or the lack of one, I might have lost my mind. I did not look when he called Olap Akram at me, and I did not linger on the fact that the sinewy, faceless man who dove into the pool burst into a school of pink and silver fish as soon as he went under. So he's really good at writing this kind of haunting, ghost-like descriptions of weird and otherworldly things. And while the novella is short, it feels like it covers a lot more ground than you would think. Because of the style and the way it references other works, it really does feel like a more in-depth history of this house, and that was where I kind of got the similarities to House of Leaves. And it is quite interesting at the end when they start incorporating more things about our time, like with the internet and different subreddits and YouTube channels that are devoted to figuring out what is going on with the house. One interesting thing about Burke is that I don't think he really focuses on traditional publishing anymore. He is a multiple award-winning horror author, highly respected, but from what I can tell, he tends to self-publish almost, or at least a lot of his stuff these days, and focusing more on Kindle and e-publishing. And he was one of the first authors that I started following that I think really embraced e-publishing. Most of his print books have a kind of print-on-demand quality to them. As you can see, they have like no writing on the spine or anything, and they don't really have any kind of like publishing information from like a publishing house. So that's why I believe that he is mainly self-publishing now. And he's absolutely good enough to be a traditionally published author. But I'm thinking that maybe that line of distinction between the two isn't really worth discussing anymore. I think he's found his audience, and he's found a way to deliver his books to his audience without needing to go through traditional publishing methods. So I say this only as a compliment to him. I wouldn't want people to dismiss him just because maybe he is self-publishing and delivering his books to his audience. But highly recommended, The House on Abigail Lane by Kealan Patrick Burke. I've read a handful of things from him, and I've liked everything that I've read, and there is a lot more out there. Okay, next up we have a book called Do You Mind If We Dance With Your Legs by Michael Cisco. So fans of the Dungeon Dive will be no strangers to Michael Cisco. He's an author that I talk about a lot. He's one of my favorite living authors, and he's also one of the most challenging authors I read, and this novella is no exception. I feel like I could read this 10 times and still not really grasp everything that it is saying or understand its themes completely. And I do think a lot of that probably has to do with the subject matter, which I'll go over in a minute. And also a lot of that does have to do with just the way that Michael Cisco writes. So this was from Nightscape Press, and it is one of their series in their charitable chapbooks, where they publish a short novella, a chapbook by an author. So this one is number 56 of 250, signed by Michael Cisco, in which the author chooses a charity to donate, I think, a third of the proceeds. Michael Cisco, for this book, chose the Los Angeles LGBT Center. It's a nonprofit organization that provides counseling, medical care, and even housing to members of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community who are in need. So I am a very straight, white, cisgendered male, and this book is dealing with a transgendered male character who identifies as a woman. And so I just want to make it clear that I apologize in advance if I use any wrong terminology when talking about the character. I am still learning about proper terminology about those things, and I do consider myself a great ally, or I want to be. So if I make any mistakes, I apologize in advance. But this is a story about a character named Pedrito Marinetti. The pronouns that Cisco uses to describe the character in the book are he and him, even though Pedrito seems to identify as a female more often than not. But Pedrito, he discovers a flyer for a missing woman named Irene Trigg, and after seeing the flyer, he decides to play detective to try to find this missing woman. Now, Pedrito is in his mid-30s. He rides his bike everywhere, and I believe he might be somewhat on the autism spectrum. He is obsessed with a number 20904, which we later discover is a time code for a very significant VHS recording that he watches. And we also come to find that he might be hearing voices. I say that he might be hearing voices because of Cisco's phantasmagorical style. It's very hard when reading Cisco, especially his books that take place in a world that is supposed to be like ours, a modern, very modern, realistic setting. Because of his style, it becomes very difficult to determine what is and what isn't actually happening. The lines between reality and unreality become blurred, to say the least, and sometimes I don't even think those lines exist at all, as characters seem to move in and out of reality and unreality with ease. So Perdito hears derogatory comments about his sexual orientation, but it's hard to determine if those voices are coming from external sources or if they are like internalized oppression. And I think that's kind of the point of the novel or the novella. And as he investigates this woman's disappearance, this woman Irene, and he gets closer and closer to finding her, his reality continues to fall apart in more substantial ways, in which he finally, I think, falls into this complete nightmare existence in which he's being operated on by his father, and the people around him seem to be these kind of like mannequins that are stuck in time. It's a very challenging work, and I am looking forward to reading it again. It is exquisitely written, and as you can see through flipping through, it is also wonderfully illustrated by Luke Spooner. Ooh, some thunder. I don't know if you guys just heard the thunder. I have my window open. It's a very spooky day here, so a good day for some horror novella talk. But yeah, it's good, and it's short enough that you can read it in a single sitting, and I think that does help to kind of get into it, and it'll help on rereads to decipher what exactly is going on in Michael Cisco's Do You Mind If We Dance With Your Legs? And then finally, we have a book from an author that I'm sure most people have heard of, and that is Clive Barker. And this is Tortured Souls. Tortured Souls is a short novella, a collection of related stories focusing on a character called the Agonistus. He is a figure who bodily transforms willing subjects into horrific killing machines. I believe that each one of these chapters was originally published as an insert for a series of toys that he and Todd McFarlane created back in the day when McFarlane was creating all of those crazy toys and doing stuff with Clive Barker. Each chapter details the transformation of a figure that the agonistus takes and transforms into some kind of horrific Cenobite-like Hellraiser being. This is an example of Barker's, like, his horrific fantasy. He creates these hellish, nightmarish, otherworldly places and creatures, and he's very good at it. I think this cover here is a good example of the kind of thing you will find in Barker's works like that. And it deals with the city called the Primordium, this ancient city, like one of a kind of a proto-human city that exists in some imagined world, not completely unlike Barker's works of a Magica and Weave world. So there isn't much of a plot here. It's more of a mood piece. It's more of a collection of stories of body horror and examining the grotesque practices of the agonista and his methods of body modification. The two other main characters are Zarls Krieger, who is an assassin, and Lucidique, who is the daughter of a senator who was Krieger's last target. And each of them separately visit the agonistas and are transformed into these blade-wielding killers. Agonistas calls his work an art, and I'm wondering if this has any connection to the books of the art. Ooh, that was some crazy thunder. Nice. So he says it is an art, what Agonistas achieves. He claims it is the first art, the creation of new flesh, being the art God used to call life into being. Agonistas believes in God, prays to him night and morning, thanking him for making a world in which there is so much hopelessness and such a profound hunger for revenge that supplicants will seek him out and beg him to reconfigure them in the image of their monstrous ideal. And it appears that God apparently finds no offense in what Agonistas does, because for 2,500 years he has walked the planet performing what he calls his holy art, and no harm has come to him. In fact, he has prospered. So yeah, pretty cool. It's a pretty slight read. There's not a lot to sink your teeth into. It's not bad, but it's just not up to Clive Barker's best standards. I read works like The Great and Secret Show and Magica and Weave decades ago, and I still remember things in those books in great detail. I read this just a few days ago, and unfortunately I've already forgotten quite a bit of it, even though I enjoyed it while I was reading it. So yeah, today we took a look at Tortured Souls by Clive Barker. We took a look at Do You Mind If We Dance With Your Legs by Michael Cisco. And we started off things with, I think, the best of the three, and that is The House on Abigail Lane by Kealan Patrick Burke. I highly recommend people look into Burke, especially if you have an e-reader. He has so much stuff available for really great prices. And I'm hoping he chimes in, because he's very active in the community. I'm hoping he chimes in a little bit maybe about his publishing practices. I would like to know more. So all right, guys, well, hope you enjoyed this look at 3 horror novellas, and we will talk to you later. Bye-bye.